She laughed at the will like it was some harmless joke, but the sound cracked through the room, and Mara felt her chest tighten as the truth she'd been holding finally pressed against the moment she feared. Lila said, "Come on, Mom. We all know how this ends." But her voice carried the edge of someone who believed she could never lose. Emma stayed silent, watching the tension rise like a storm neither sister wanted to name. When David cleared his throat and read the line that removed Lila entirely, the air shifted, and Lila froze as if the floor vanished beneath her feet. What truth could destroy their family forever? Why did Lila betray the one person who trusted her, who lied first, and who would pay the price for years of silence? Emma felt the room tilt, knowing this was only the beginning. Mara watched both daughters as the echo of the revelation hung in the air, and she tried to steady her breath while the weight of her choice pressed against her heart, like a confession she wasn't ready to repeat. Lila glared at her with disbelief, muttering, "This can't be real," while Emma kept her hands folded, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. The room felt smaller than ever, and Mara wondered whether she had just severed something that could never be repaired. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words clung to her throat as fear mixed with certainty. How long had she carried this secret alone? And how long before the truth shattered everything they thought they understood about their own family? Lila stormed out of the office and cornered Emma in the hallway, her voice sharp with accusation as she demanded to know what influence Emma had over their mother. Emma tried to calm her, saying, "I didn't even know she changed anything." But Lila refused to listen, pacing like someone whose world had begun to crumble. The hallway lights flickered above them, the hum filling the silence between their breaths as old resentment resurfaced, like bruises that never heal. Emma felt her chest tighten, knowing Lila wasn't really angry at her but terrified of what the missing name meant. And beneath it all, Mara's choice lingered like a storm cloud. Neither sister knew how to escape. Mara stepped outside for air, her hands trembling as she recalled the night she decided to rewrite the will. She remembered sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the documents that once protected her daughters equally, and feeling the sting of betrayal when Emma revealed the truth months ago. She had wanted to ignore it, to pretend the world inside their home could remain steady. But Lila's actions made that impossible. As she breathed in the colder air, she wondered whether she had done the right thing or simply reopened wounds she tried to bury. The ache in her chest whispered that some choices break you, even when they're necessary. Lila returned to the parking lot with a fire in her eyes, replaying the moment her name vanished from the will. She whispered to herself, "There's more to this," refusing to accept that Mara had acted without reason. The shadows stretched long across the pavement as she paced, each step sharper than the last. Emma hesitated near the door, watching her sister unravel but unsure whether stepping closer would calm her or ignite another outburst. Lila clenched her fists and vowed she would uncover whatever truth Mara was hiding, even if it meant tearing open the past. And with that vow, the first fracture in their fragile family line deepened. Emma tried to console Lila, who, despite her earlier outburst, was now retreating into herself. "Lila, I didn't want this," Emma said, her voice low, laced with empathy. "I didn't even know Mom was going to do this." But Lila wasn't listening. Her eyes were clouded with suspicion, and her anger simmered just beneath the surface. "You think she'd ever trust you over me?" Lila's voice cracked as she stepped away from Emma, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The lines between them were no longer clear, and the bond they once had was now tainted by doubt. "She made her choice," Lila muttered, bitterness creeping in. "And you're just as much a part of this as I am." In the quiet of the evening, Mara sat alone at the dining room table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. The weight of her decision hung like an anchor, pulling her deeper into reflection. As she turned the pages of the will, the memories began to flood back. The day she first discovered the financial manipulation, the false reports that Lila had planted. She could still see the panic in Emma's eyes when she found out about the forged documents, the betrayal that had nearly ruined everything. Mara had struggled with her decision to rewrite the will, but in the end her choice had felt inevitable. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust, and Lila had shattered it. Mara met with David in his office the following morning. As he pored over the legal documents, she could see the concern in his eyes. "You've made a bold move," David said, his voice calm but laced with a subtle warning. "Are you sure this is the right choice?" Mara nodded, her eyes tired but resolute. "It was the only choice," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "Lila made a decision to betray us, and I can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't give her everything." David leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I just want you to be certain. This could tear the family apart." Mara didn't flinch. She had already felt that tear inside her heart. For months, Lila spent the next few days going through old family files, searching for something. Anything that would clear her name. The guilt gnawed at her, but her anger burned hotter. If she could find one piece of evidence that showed Emma had been the one to manipulate their mother, she might have a chance to undo what had been done. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the files had been tampered with long before she thought. The documents that should have been proof of her innocence were now gone. Someone had covered their tracks too well. And it wasn't just Emma. Lila had to face the uncomfortable truth. She had been caught in her own lies. One evening, as Mara prepared dinner, she overheard Emma speaking on the phone in the other room. Her voice was shaky, and Mara could hear the desperation behind her words. "I don't know what to do, Mom," Emma was saying. "I just don't know how we got here." Mara set down the knife in her hand and listened. She had always thought that Emma would be the one to understand her choices. But now, even Emma seemed uncertain. As the minutes passed, Mara found herself questioning everything. Was this really the right path? Could the family ever come back from this? The answer was unclear, but as she stood there, she knew that she had already stepped too far down the road to turn back. The morning after the phone call, Lila confronted Emma. "I know you're lying," she spat, her face contorted in frustration. "You and Mom have been conspiring against me, haven't you?" Emma's eyes widened in shock. "Lila, I swear, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything." But Lila wasn't listening. "I can see it," Lila hissed. "You've always been the golden child, and now Mom's just throwing me away like I'm nothing." Emma stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen Lila like this before. The anger in her voice felt like a wall she couldn't climb over. "It's not like that," Emma whispered. But it was clear that Lila had already made up her mind. The flashbacks of that night when Mara first discovered the forged documents still haunted Emma. She could see Lila's face, the desperation in her eyes as she had tried to hide the truth. That night, Emma had stayed up late, piecing together the fragments of information she had found. She knew then that she could never go back to the way things were. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust, and that was something that could never be rebuilt. Emma had chosen to keep the secret from Mara, not because she wanted to protect Lila, but because she didn't want to lose her mother forever. Mara stared at the legal papers, remembering the exact moment she had discovered Lila's betrayal. She had always trusted her oldest daughter. Too much, perhaps. But that trust had been shattered when the forged documents came to light. She had tried to ignore the signs, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but the weight of what Lila had done had been too much to bear. It was then that Mara knew she couldn't leave the family's future in Lila's hands. But as she looked at the will again, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a mistake. Could she have handled it differently? Could she have found another way to protect her family without tearing it apart? Emma sat on the couch, trying to steady her breath, when Lila walked in with a forced calm that made every hair on Emma's arms rise. "We need to talk," Lila said, her tone sweet but hollow, as if she were trying to sell a lie she no longer believed herself. Emma's heart tightened, knowing this wasn't a conversation. It was another storm disguised as a peace offering. Lila sat beside her, too close, her hand resting on the cushion between them like a trap. "I know you didn't tell Mom everything," Lila whispered, eyes narrowing. "But you can still fix this." Emma swallowed hard, realizing Lila wasn't after forgiveness. She was after control, and for the first time, Emma wondered how far her sister would go to rewrite the past in her favor. David walked into Mara's kitchen just as she was wiping down the counter for the third time, her mind far from the task. "You look worn out," he said gently, and she didn't bother pretending otherwise. She told him everything. Lilia's anger, Emma's fear, and the sense that the house itself had begun to crack under the pressure. David listened quietly, then placed the folder of documents on the counter. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," he warned, his voice steady but heavy. Mara felt her stomach twist because she knew he was right. She had hoped the storm would ease once the will was read, but the storm had only just begun. And each daughter was digging deeper into the wounds that had haunted them for years. The house felt electric as Lila stormed inside, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Emma stood near the end of the hallway, frozen as the tension rushed toward her like a wave ready to break. "You've been working against me this whole time," Lila snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. Emma shook her head, but the words caught in her throat as Lila stepped closer, her anger pulsing through each breath. From the kitchen, Mara listened with dread, realizing the thin line holding their family together was tearing faster than she could mend. For a moment, Emma considered running, but something stronger kept her still. The need to finally understand what her sister would do next, and how much damage she was willing to cause. Later that afternoon, Mara opened an old storage box in the living room, hoping to distract herself, but instead she found photographs she had long avoided. As she sifted through them, she noticed tiny inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, expressions that hinted at tension even during moments that should have been peaceful. Emma joined her quietly, and together they studied a picture of Lila smiling at the camera while holding a document Mara remembered was missing the night everything went wrong. "She said she never touched it," Emma murmured, her voice trembling slightly. Mara felt a sting in her chest as the realization sank in. The photo was proof Lila had lied long before forged papers surfaced. The past wasn't just messy, it had been rewritten to suit Lila's story. All along, Emma slipped away to her bedroom, closing the door behind her as quietly as she could. The moment the latch clicked, her composure crumbled. She sank onto the edge of her bed, gripping the blanket as memories of Lila's manipulation resurfaced one by one. Each lie, each twisted truth, each moment she had tried to protect her sister only to be hurt again. The pressure building in her chest spilled out in quiet sobs. She tried to muffle with her hands. She didn't want Mara to hear. She didn't want Lila to know she was breaking. For years, Emma had been the quiet one, the forgiving one, the daughter who kept the peace. But now the weight of carrying everyone's pain felt too heavy to hold alone. Lila found Mara in the kitchen, her footsteps sharp and deliberate as she approached. "We're talking now," she insisted, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. Mara turned slowly, her eyes wary, bracing herself for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. "You cut me out without even telling me why," Lila said, her fists clenched. "You think I don't deserve answers?" Mara took a breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She wanted to speak calmly, but the hurt in Lila's eyes made the moment feel like standing on broken glass. "There were reasons," Mara whispered. "Reasons I hoped you'd understand someday." Lila stepped forward, her voice cracking as she demanded, "Then tell me everything." Mara stepped away from the counter, her voice trembling as she finally allowed a fraction of the truth to surface. "Lila," she began. There were things you did that you never admitted. Things that hurt this family more than you know. Lila blinked, startled by the raw honesty in her mother's tone, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. Like what? You think I ruined everything? Mara nodded slowly, heartbreak threading through her voice. You didn't ruin everything, she said softly, but you came close. Lila's bravado faltered as she searched Mara's eyes for answers, but all she saw was pain she didn't know how to read. Mara knew this was only the beginning of what she needed to reveal, and the rest would cut even deeper. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching the faded folder she had hidden for years, her heartbeat thundering as Lila and Mara stared at her. I can't hold this anymore, she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the heavy silence. She laid the documents on the table, pages showing the edits, the forged signatures, the numbers shifted just enough to put the family at risk. Lila's face drained of color as she recognized her own handwriting. That wasn't supposed to be found, she muttered, barely audible. Mara's breath caught, her eyes shining with shock and grief as she finally saw what Emma had protected all this time. As the room tightened with truth, Emma felt both relief and dread. This confession could free them, or break them all forever. Lila reached for the documents with shaking hands, flipping through them as if hoping each page would magically change. This isn't what it looks like, she tried to insist, but her voice broke, betraying the guilt she could no longer hide. Emma felt her throat tighten, watching her sister crumble under the weight of her own choices. Mara stepped closer, her voice soft but unyielding. You almost cost us everything, she whispered. Lila closed her eyes, swallowing hard as regret cracked through her defenses. The room felt painfully quiet, and for the first time Lila didn't fight back. She simply sagged into the truth she had spent years avoiding. The betrayal, once buried, had finally clawed its way into the open. David arrived minutes later, summoned by Mara's shaken voice. As he examined the documents, his brow tightened with each page he turned. These weren't simple mistakes, he said quietly. This was deliberate. Lila lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Emma stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself as she watched sunlight fade across the floor, wishing the truth didn't hurt so much. Mara felt her heart crack with every word. David spoke. You could have destroyed us, he continued, his voice neither harsh nor forgiving, just honest. The room felt heavier with each passing second, and Mara realized that the damage wasn't only financial. It was emotional, deep, and years old. Mara stepped away from everyone, pressing her hands against the countertop as her emotions surged. She had spent years trying to hold her daughters together, but now she felt the pieces slipping through her fingers. She heard Emma's quiet breathing behind her and Lila's soft, broken murmurs from the living room. The weight of their pain pressed against her chest like a tidal wave she couldn't escape. She wanted to scream, to cry, to rewind time and fix whatever had shattered her eldest child so deeply. But all she could do was stare at her own reflection in the kitchen window, wondering where everything had gone so terribly wrong, and whether any amount of love could mend the crack running through the heart of their family. As the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded letter she had kept hidden for years. She handed it to Mara with trembling fingers. You should see this, she whispered. Mara opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she recognized the handwriting. The letter Emma had written long ago, explaining how she uncovered the financial mess and stopped the family from losing everything. Lila had hidden it, afraid it would expose the truth. Mara felt tears gather as she traced Emma's words, realizing her youngest had saved them long before the crisis began. The truth was no longer just about betrayal. It was about a love that had gone unseen, buried beneath years of silence and fear. Lila found Emma alone in the living room, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. I need to talk to you, she said, but her tone carried a tremble that revealed more fear than anger. Emma looked up cautiously, unsure whether this was another trap. Lila sank onto the couch, wiping her palms on her jeans as if trying to rid herself of guilt. "I messed up," she whispered, and for a moment the weight of her words filled the room. Emma felt a tug of sympathy, but the memory of years of deceit tightened her chest. Lila reached out slightly, not touching, just hoping. "Tell Mom I can fix this," she pleaded. Emma shook her head slowly, realizing this wasn't accountability. This was desperation. Mara stepped into her bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it as the silence pressed in from all sides. The weight of the family's history felt unbearable, like 1,000 unanswered questions crowding her thoughts. She walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer, pulling out a small wooden box she had kept hidden for years. Inside were letters, receipts, and mementos from the past, proof of the moments she had tried so hard to forget. As she sifted through them, she felt a deep ache for the family she once believed they were. She knew she had to decide what came next, and the decision carried more than inheritance. It carried the story of who they would become after the truth. Emma wandered onto the porch, letting the evening air cool her flushed skin. She stared out at the fading sunset, wondering if forgiveness was even possible now. She had carried secrets for so long that she barely remembered what it felt like to breathe freely. But despite everything, there remained a small part of her that wished her sister would change, wished the family could somehow reset. "Maybe I held on too tightly," she whispered to herself, unsure if she meant the hope or the fear. The sky darkened slowly, and she realized that forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a long road she wasn't sure she had strength to walk. Lila found herself alone for the first time since everything unraveled. Sitting on her bed, she stared at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing someone she barely recognized. She replayed every choice, every lie, every moment she had chosen pride over honesty. The silence around her felt suffocating, pressing her mistakes against her like a mirror she couldn't look away from. She whispered, "How did I get here?" But the room offered no answer. For the first time, the fear of losing her family felt real, not as a punishment, but as a consequence she had built with her own hands. Mara gathered herself and walked slowly into the living room, where Emma and Lila remained separated by a distance that felt larger than the room itself. She looked at both daughters, her heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice steady but lined with emotion. Both girls turned toward her, the air thick with anticipation. Mara took a breath, knowing the next words would reshape everything. "Before I changed the will, I discovered something else, something neither of you know yet." The room fell silent as the truth hovered on her lips, a revelation waiting to break the last fragile layer holding their fractured family in place. Mara finally spoke the words she had been holding back for years, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence. "Lila, what you lost wasn't just money." Lila's brows tightened as she waited, dread slowly creeping across her features. Emma leaned forward, sensing the moment's gravity. Mara continued, "You lost the one thing your grandmother wanted you to have. The piece of our family history meant to remind you of who you were supposed to become." Lila blinked, confused at first, then suddenly tense as memories began to stir. "But it was stolen years ago," she whispered. Mara shook her head. "No, it wasn't stolen. You destroyed it." The truth hit like a blow, leaving Lila breathless as the room tilted around her. Lila's breath caught as the memory flooded back. The day she tore through the attic searching for documents that could prove her worth, grabbing boxes carelessly until one slipped and shattered. Inside had been the heirloom, her grandmother's delicate ceramic locket box, the last symbol of hope passed down to the oldest daughter. She had swept the pieces away in panic, telling herself no one would ever know. But someone had known. Mara stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Your grandmother trusted you with that. She believed you'd honor it." Lila pressed a shaking hand to her mouth as guilt twisted her insides. The truth wasn't just painful, it was devastating. Emma swallowed hard as she watched her sister crumble beneath the truth. Part of her felt the old ache, years of pain from lies and manipulation, but another part felt a flicker of empathy she didn't expect. "Lila," she said softly, stepping forward. "You should have told us." Lila looked up with tear-filled eyes, desperate for forgiveness but afraid to reach for it. "I didn't know how," she whispered, her voice cracking. Emma took a slow breath, feeling her heart pull in two directions. She wasn't sure forgiveness could erase the past, but maybe honesty could at least stop the bleeding. "We can't change what happened," Emma said, voice trembling, "but maybe we can stop it from getting worse." Mara stepped between her daughters, feeling the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. She had carried their pain, hidden her own, and tried to shield them from truths she feared would destroy them. But now, everything was exposed. "I made my choice because trust matters more than inheritance," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Lila wiped her face, nodding slowly as reality settled into the deepest parts of her guilt. Emma watched, unsure whether this moment marked an ending or a fragile beginning. Mara sighed softly. "I love you both," she whispered. "But love doesn't erase consequences." The words broke something open in all three of them: pain, truth, and the hope for something better. Night settled over the house as the three of them stood in a silence thicker than anything they had faced before. Mara placed the wooden box of memories on the table between them, a symbol of everything broken and everything still worth saving. "This family can heal," she said quietly. "But only if we choose to." Emma nodded, though uncertainty flickered behind her eyes. Lila stared at the box, knowing she couldn't undo what she'd done. But maybe she could start rebuilding from here. The silence stretched, heavy with promises not yet spoken. Outside, a faint wind brushed the windows, as if nudging the house toward whatever came next. The ending wasn't closure. It was a crossroads.